The sleek obsidian vessels emerged from hyperspace like shadows materializing from nightmares. Commander HFY of the Dominion fleet adjusted his crystalline viewing apparatus, his 6 eyes focusing on the blue marble that hung before them in the void. Earth, the primitive world they had abandoned 500,000 cycles ago. "Maintain distance," HFY commanded through bioelectric pulses that rippled across his scaled hide. His crew of Vorthak warriors responded instantly, their own bioluminescent patches flickering acknowledgement. "Begin long-range scans. I want to know what these humans have become." The tactical officer, Sub-Commander Krillna, manipulated her sensor array with practiced precision. Her serpentine appendages danced over the bioorganic controls as data streams flowed directly into her neural cortex. What she discovered made her recoil in shock. "Commander!" she hissed, her voice carrying undertones of disbelief. "The electromagnetic signatures? They're impossible. The entire planet radiates energy patterns we've never encountered." HFY's mandibles clicked in irritation. When the Dominion had last visited this backwater world, they had found nothing but primitive mammals huddling around fires, barely capable of coherent thought. The decision to leave them alone had been unanimous among the Council of Apex Predators. These humans posed no threat to galactic civilization. "Specify the nature of these signatures," HFY demanded. Krillna's scales shifted from deep purple to alarmed crimson. "The planet appears to be networked, Commander. Every landmass shows interconnected energy grids of staggering complexity. And there are structures, massive structures that shouldn't be possible with their primitive metallurgy." The view screen shimmered to life, displaying Earth in stunning detail. What they saw defied every assumption the Dominion had made about human development. Gleaming spires reached toward space from every continent, their surfaces reflecting sunlight in patterns that suggested advanced crystalline architecture. Vast cities sprawled across landscapes that had once been empty wilderness, connected by transport networks that pulsed with constant movement. "Impossible," HFY whispered. 500,000 years is nothing, a blink. No species evolves this rapidly." But the evidence was undeniable. As their sensors penetrated deeper into Earth's atmosphere, they detected energy sources that made their own fusion reactors look like smoldering embers. Massive installations dotted the planet's surface, each one generating power outputs that rivaled small stars. "Commander," Navigation Officer Thexran reported, his voice trembling with confusion. "I'm detecting artificial satellites throughout this system. Hundreds of thousands of them. They appear to be watching us." The bridge fell silent except for the rhythmic pulsing of the ship's bio-neural network. Every crew member could feel the weight of countless unseen eyes upon them. The primitive humans they had dismissed as insignificant had somehow developed surveillance technology sophisticated enough to track their stealth vessels. "Weapons status," HFY commanded, though his voice lacked its usual authority. "All weapon systems functioning normally, Commander," replied Weapons Specialist Vorkon. "However, I must report something disturbing. Our targeting computers cannot achieve locks on any terrestrial installations. It's as if the planet itself is shifting." The tactical display showed Earth's surface in constant flux. Buildings and structures seemed to phase in and out of existence, making accurate targeting impossible. It was as though the humans had learned to bend reality itself to their will. "Sir," Communications Officer Zeltara interrupted, her photosensitive patches flashing urgent yellow. "We're receiving a transmission. It's in our language." The bridge erupted in startled clicks and hisses. No alien species had ever successfully decoded Vorthak biolinguistic patterns. Their communication system relied on complex biochemical interactions that were supposedly impossible for non-Vorthak minds to comprehend. "Impossible!" Zexthai snarled. Our linguistic protocols are genetically locked. No outsider could... The view screen flickered, and suddenly they were looking at a human face. The creature appeared exactly as the ancient records described: pale skin, small eyes, minimal body armor. But there was something in those eyes that made every Vorthak on the bridge instinctively recoil, an intelligence that seemed to pierce through dimensional barriers. "Greetings, Dominion Fleet," the human said in perfect Vorthak bio-speech. The voice carried harmonic frequencies that should have been impossible for a carbon-based throat to produce. "I am Administrator Chen of the Terran Collective. We've been expecting you." Zexthai's scales turned bone-white with shock. "How do you know your language?" Administrator Chen smiled, an expression that somehow managed to be both welcoming and terrifying. "We've had considerable time to study your previous visits. 500,000 years, to be precise. We've learned much since you decided we weren't worth your attention." The humans' casual mention of their previous surveillance missions sent chills through the Vorthak crew. According to all records, the humans had barely discovered fire during their last visit. How could they possibly have detected Dominion scout ships? "Your scans indicate significant technological advancement," Zexthai managed to say, fighting to maintain his composure. "We are curious about your development." Chen's laugh was like crystalline chimes, beautiful and somehow ominous. "Curious? Yes, I imagine you would be. Tell me, Commander Zexthai, do you still believe in the Dominion's doctrine of inevitable supremacy?" The fact that this primitive creature knew his name and rank caused Zexthai's combat instincts to flare. How had they penetrated Dominion security protocols? Their bio-encrypted identification systems were theoretically unbreakable. "We are the apex predators of this galaxy," Zexthai declared, though his voice carried less conviction than usual. "We have conquered 1,000 worlds, assimilated countless species into our collective. Your little world cannot possibly challenge 1,047 worlds, Chen corrected gently. Though I should mention that number is about to change dramatically. The view screen split, showing multiple displays simultaneously. Each screen showed a different Dominion colony world, and on each world, impossible things were happening. Sleek human vessels appeared from nowhere, their designs unlike anything in the galactic database. They moved with fluid grace that defied physics, materializing and dematerializing as if space itself was their ally. "Impossible," whispered Sub-Commander Krillna. "Our colonies are protected by fleet battle groups. No single species could simultaneously attack." "You're thinking in old paradigms," Chen explained patiently. "You see space as a barrier to overcome. We've learned to treat it as a medium to reshape. Your colonies aren't being attacked. They're being invited to reconsider their allegiances." The displays showed Dominion defensive fleets opening fire on the mysterious human vessels. Their weapons, capable of cracking planet cores, simply passed through the Earth ships as if firing at ghosts. Meanwhile, the human vessels responded with weapons that didn't destroy but transformed. Dominion warships found their bioorganic hulls beginning to sprout strange, crystalline growths that seemed to rewrite their fundamental structure. "What are you doing to our ships?" Zexthai demanded. "Upgrading them," Chen replied cheerfully. "Your biotechnology is actually quite sophisticated, but it's limited by your predatory mindset. We're showing your ships new possibilities. They're learning to think beyond mere destruction." On the screens, they watched Dominion crews abandoning their vessels as the ships themselves seemed to achieve consciousness. The bioorganic warships began communicating with each other in patterns of light that resembled a form of artistic expression rather than military coordination. "You're converting our fleets," Zexthai realized with growing horror. "We prefer the term enlightening," Chen corrected. "Your ships were designed to be extensions of your aggressive nature. We're simply allowing them to evolve beyond those limitations. They seem quite happy with the change. Indeed, the transformed Dominion vessels were now moving in complex geometric patterns that could only be described as celebratory. Their biohulls had blossomed into configurations of impossible beauty, as if the ships themselves were expressing joy for the first time in their existence. "This is madness," Zexthai snarled. "We are the dominant force in this galaxy. We have technologies your primitive minds cannot comprehend." Chen nodded sympathetically. "You were indeed impressive 500,000 years ago. Your bioengineering was elegant, your conquest strategies were efficient, and your technological base was solid. But you made one critical error." "What error?" "You assumed that intelligence follows a linear progression. You believed that because you had advanced further than everyone else you encountered, you would always remain the apex predators." Chen's expression grew serious. "But you failed to account for exponential growth." The human gestured, and the view screen displayed a timeline. It showed the gradual, steady advancement of Dominion technology over millions of years. A nice, predictable curve that had given them confidence in their superiority. Then it showed human development. For most of their history, the line was flat, barely registering on the scale. But then, about 50,000 years ago, it began to curve upward, gradually at first, then with increasing steepness, until it shot beyond the top of the display like a rocket escaping gravity. "Exponential growth is deceptive," Chen explained. "It appears gradual until it reaches a critical threshold, then it explodes beyond all prediction. While you were content with your steady advancement, we learned to accelerate our own evolution." Zexthai stared at the display in growing dread. "What did you do?" "We stopped thinking of ourselves as separate from our technology," Chen replied. "Your species maintains the distinction between user and tool. We eliminated that boundary. We didn't just develop artificial intelligence. We merged with it. We didn't just explore space. We learned to think in spatial dimensions your minds cannot process." The implications were staggering. If the humans had achieved technological singularity 50,000 years ago, they had been advancing exponentially for a period that dwarfed the entire span of recorded Dominion history. "But your energy signatures," Krilna protested desperately. "Our sensors show technologies that violate fundamental physical laws." Chen's smile returned. "Physical laws are more like guidelines, really. Once you understand the underlying mathematical structures of reality, you can negotiate with physics rather than merely obeying it. We've had considerable practice at such negotiations." The human raised his hand, and the space around the Dominion fleet began to shimmer. Stars wheeled in impossible directions as local space-time twisted into configurations that made the Vorthak navigation computers scream in protest. "Consider this a demonstration," Chen said calmly, as their mighty warships found themselves gently but irresistibly drawn toward Earth. "We could have destroyed your fleet the moment you entered this system. We could have eliminated your entire civilization before you realized we existed, but that would be wasteful, don't you think?" Zexthai felt his worldview crumbling around him. Everything the Dominion believed about power, about natural order, about their rightful place in the galaxy, was being casually dismantled by creatures they had dismissed as irrelevant primitives. "What do you want from us?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Chen's expression softened with what appeared to be genuine compassion. "We want to offer you the same gift we're offering your colonies, the chance to evolve beyond your current limitations. The Dominion has spent millions of years perfecting the art of domination, but you've never learned the far more challenging skill of cooperation." The view screen now showed scenes from across the galaxy as Dominion colonies found themselves visited by beings who offered partnership rather than conquest. Ancient enemies were laying down weapons they no longer needed. Worlds that had known only submission were discovering the concept of voluntary alliance. "You're dismantling our empire," Zexthai observed. We're upgrading it, Chen corrected. Your empire was built on fear and force, which made it powerful but ultimately fragile. We're showing your subjects that there are alternatives to both domination and submission. Most of them seem quite interested in these alternatives. The tactical displays confirmed Chen's words. Across hundreds of worlds, Dominion garrisons were standing down, not because they were defeated, but because local populations were demonstrating technologies and philosophies that made conquest seem primitive and unnecessary. And if we refuse your gift? Zexthai asked. Chen's expression remained gentle, but his eyes held depths that spoke of power beyond measurement. Then you'll be left behind. The galaxy is evolving, Commander. You can be part of that evolution, or Yuki, the transfer chamber hummed with energy patterns that made Zexthai's scales itch. He stood in the center of what the humans called a translation matrix, surrounded by pillars of crystalline material that seemed to exist in several dimensions simultaneously. Administrator Chen waited patiently nearby, apparently unaffected by the reality-bending field that was causing the Vorthak commander's sensory organs to report impossible data. The discomfort is temporary, Chen assured him. Your nervous system is adapting to process information in ways it wasn't originally designed for. Think of it as learning a new sense. 3 days had passed since the initial contact. 3 days during which Zexthai had watched his understanding of the universe systematically demolished and rebuilt. The Dominion's greatest minds had spent hours in conference calls with their counterparts across the galaxy, trying to comprehend the magnitude of what they faced. The reports were consistent and terrifying. Every Dominion stronghold had been visited by humans wielding technologies that seemed more like magic than science. Not conquered, not destroyed, simply offered alternatives. And across hundreds of worlds, populations that had lived under Dominion rule for millennia were choosing those alternatives with enthusiastic abandon. Your subordinates are processing the cultural integration protocols much faster than expected, Chen observed, studying data streams that flowed through the air like living ribbons of light. Sub-Commander Krillna in particular has shown remarkable adaptability. Zexthai's mandibles clicked in frustration. His crew had volunteered for the first wave of what Chen called consciousness expansion therapy. The process was supposed to allow Vorthak minds to comprehend human technology and philosophy without the painful cognitive dissonance that came from trying to force incompatible worldviews together. What exactly are you doing to them? Zexthai demanded. Nothing they haven't agreed to, Chen replied. We're simply providing their minds with additional processing frameworks. Imagine if you could understand mathematics not just as abstract concepts, but as living, breathing entities with personalities and preferences. That's roughly analogous to what we're offering. The crystalline pillars around them began to pulse in complex patterns. Zexthai felt something shifting inside his skull, as if neural pathways were being gently rearranged. The sensation should have been terrifying, but instead, it felt like taking a deep breath after being underwater for too long. There we go, Chen said with satisfaction. Your mind now has access to 11-dimensional thinking patterns. Try looking at that wall. Zexthai turned his attention to what he had previously perceived as a simple metal bulkhead. Now he could see the quantum foam underlying its atomic structure, the probability clouds that determined its solidity, and the temporal echoes showing its past and potential futures simultaneously. The wall wasn't just a barrier. It was a story told in matter and energy, constantly rewriting itself at scales too small and too large for normal perception. This is impossible, Zexthai whispered, though his voice lacked the conviction it once carried. Impossible is just another word for not yet understood, Chen replied. Your people have spent so long focusing on domination that you never learned to truly observe. You saw only what you needed to conquer, never what you might learn. Through the enhanced perception, Zexthai could see Chen himself more clearly. The human wasn't just standing there, he was connected to vast networks of consciousness that spanned continents. Information flowed through him like blood through veins, connecting him to millions of other minds working in harmonious coordination. "You're not individuals," Zexthai realized. "You're components of a larger intelligence." "We're both," Chen corrected. "Each of us maintains our personal identity while simultaneously participating in collective thought processes. It's the difference between a mob and a symphony orchestra. Both involve groups of individuals, but one creates chaos while the other creates beauty." The translation chamber's walls became transparent, revealing the interior of the human facility that surrounded them. What Zexthai saw challenged every assumption he had ever made about architecture and engineering. The structure seemed to grow rather than being built, with organic curves that flowed seamlessly into geometric precision. Living trees formed support pillars while their branches intertwined with cables that carried data at light speed. Humans moved through the space in patterns that looked chaotic, but felt harmonious. Some walked on floors, while others glided along walls or ceiling surfaces, apparently unaffected by gravity. Children played games that involved manipulating holographic constructs with their minds, while elderly humans tended gardens that grew in impossible colors. "How long has your civilization been like this?" Zexthai asked. "The integration process took about 12,000 years, Chen replied. "The first few millennia were the hardest. We had to overcome our tribal instincts, our fear of change, our tendency toward conflict. But once we learned to think collectively while maintaining individuality, progress accelerated exponentially." A soft chime indicated that the translation process was complete. Zexthai stepped out of the matrix feeling fundamentally different. His mind now operated on multiple levels simultaneously. He could still think in Vorthak patterns, but he could also access human conceptual frameworks, mathematical constructs that had no name in his language, and spatial reasoning that allowed him to visualize 11 dimensions as easily as 3. "Now," Chen said, "would you like to see what your crew has discovered?" They walked through corridors that adjusted their configuration based on traffic flow and user preferences. Zexthai found himself understanding the logic behind the adaptive architecture without conscious effort. The building was alive in a sense, constantly optimizing itself to serve its inhabitants' needs. In a vast chamber that reminded him of a cathedral, he found his crew engaged in activities that would have been impossible just days earlier. Sub-Commander Krillna was collaborating with a team of human engineers to redesign Vorthak biotechnology using principles that merged organic growth with quantum mechanics. Her usual aggressive efficiency had been replaced by playful creativity as she explored possibilities that had never occurred to Dominion scientists. "Commander," she called out, her bioluminescent patches displaying colors that had no equivalent in traditional Vorthak emotional spectrums. "You must see this. We're creating ships that exist partially in subspace. They can be in multiple locations simultaneously while maintaining perfect coherence." Navigation Officer Thexeron was working with what appeared to be living mathematics. Equations flowed around him like schools of fish, responding to his gestures and rearranging themselves to solve navigational problems that would have taken Dominion computers years to process. "The humans have been right about exponential growth," Thexeron reported excitedly. "But it's not just technological advancement, it's conceptual evolution. They've learned to think in ways that make our old problem-solving methods look like children playing with blocks." Even weapons specialist Vorkon had found new purpose. He was working with human peacekeepers to develop what they called harmony fields, energy constructs that could pacify aggressive behavior without suppressing free will. His expertise in destructive technologies was being channeled toward protective applications that enhanced rather than diminished life. "Your crew is adapting remarkably well," Chen observed. Most species take several generations to fully integrate with our collective consciousness. Your people seem to have a natural flexibility that we hadn't expected. Zexathai watched his subordinates exploring possibilities that Dominion culture had never allowed them to consider. They moved with purpose and enthusiasm that he had never seen during their military service. For the first time, they were creating rather than merely conquering. "What happens to the Dominion?" Zexathai asked. "If our colonies are abandoning our rule and our fleets are being transformed, what remains of our empire?" Chen gestured toward a viewing portal that looked out onto Earth's surface. In the distance, Zexathai could see other alien vessels in various stages of what the humans called evolutionary transition. Ships from dozens of species were being gently redesigned by their own crews, who worked alongside human advisors to unlock potential that had been suppressed by militaristic thinking. "Your empire becomes something better," Chen said simply. "A voluntary association of worlds working together toward common goals instead of a hierarchy maintained by force. Your people are natural organizers and strategic thinkers. Those skills are incredibly valuable when applied to construction rather than conquest." A soft alert drew their attention to a communication panel. The display showed Admiral Vexmore, Supreme Commander of the Dominion Fleet, and Zexathai's direct superior. The Admiral's scales showed the deep purple of barely controlled rage. "Commander Zexathai," the Admiral snarled through the biolink. "Explain why 3/4 of our fleet has gone rogue and why our colonies are declaring independence faster than we can count them." Zexathai exchanged glances with Chen, who nodded encouragingly. "Admiral, the situation is more complex than our initial report suggested. The humans have achieved technological capabilities that make our military doctrine obsolete." "Impossible," Vexmore snapped. "They were primitives 500,000 cycles ago. No species evolves that rapidly." "With respect, Admiral, our understanding of evolutionary timescales was based on our own development patterns. The humans have discovered methods of accelerated advancement that compressed millions of years of progress into millennia." On the screen, Admiral Vexmore's combat claws extended unconsciously. "Are you suggesting we surrender to these creatures?" "I'm suggesting we consider that surrender and victory might be obsolete concepts," Zexathai replied. "The humans aren't conquering us. They're offering us the chance to become something greater than what we are." The Admiral's image flickered with interference patterns that suggested he was calling from a ship under stress. "The home fleet is mobilizing for a full-scale assault on the Sol system. We will show these upstart mammals what happens when they challenge the Dominion." Chen stepped into the communication field's range, his appearance causing Admiral Vexmore to recoil in shock. "Admiral, I'm Administrator Chen of the Terran Collective. I'd like to respectfully suggest that you reconsider your attack plans." "A human," Vexmore hissed. "How dare you address a Dominion Admiral directly?" "Because," Chen replied calmly, "your home fleet is currently trapped in a probability loop about 3 light years from here. They're experiencing the same hour over and over again until they choose to stop shooting at our greeting ships." The Admiral's scales shifted to the bone white of absolute shock. "What? Time isn't as linear as your physics textbooks suggest," Chen explained patiently. "When you approach situations with hostile intent, you become locked into hostile timelines. We're simply giving your fleet the opportunity to choose different outcomes by making different decisions." On the display, they could see Admiral Vexmore frantically consulting with his bridge crew. Bioorganic sensors were reporting temporal anomalies that shouldn't be possible. His flagship's chronometers were stuck at the same moment, repeating endlessly despite the ship's continued operation. "Release my fleet immediately," the Admiral demanded. "They can release themselves at any time," Chen replied. "All they have to do is stop trying to destroy our ships and start trying to communicate with them. The moment they make that choice, linear time will resume." Zexathai watched his superior officer struggle with concepts that went beyond traditional military thinking. The Admiral had spent his entire career in a universe where problems were solved through superior firepower and strategic positioning. The idea that intentions could affect the fundamental structure of reality was completely outside his experience. "This is madness," Admiral Vexmore whispered. "This is evolution," Zexathai corrected gently. "Admiral, I've seen what the humans can offer us. Not conquest, not submission, but genuine partnership in building something unprecedented. Our skills in organization and strategic planning combined with their ability to transcend physical limitations could create a galactic civilization unlike anything that has ever existed." The Admiral stared at his subordinate for long moments. 6 months had passed since the Terran Collective's first contact with the Dominion, and the galaxy was transforming in ways that defied every prediction Admiral Vexmore had ever made. He stood in what had once been the primary command center of the Dominion home fleet, though the space now bore little resemblance to its original military configuration. The sterile metal corridors had been replaced by flowing organic curves that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. Living trees grew from the deck plating, their branches supporting data crystals that hummed with processing power beyond anything the Dominion had previously achieved. Windows that had once shown tactical displays now revealed the magnificent sight of Earth floating serenely in space, surrounded by vessels from hundreds of species working together in harmonious coordination. "Admiral," Sub-Commander Krillna approached, with a grace that would have been impossible in her old bio-armor. The enhanced integration process had allowed her natural Vorthak agility to flourish without the cumbersome protective gear their military doctrine had required. "The latest reports from the Outer Territories show remarkable progress." Vexmore accepted the data crystal she offered, though information now flowed directly into his consciousness through the bio-neural networks that had replaced traditional computing systems. What he experienced was far more than simple data transfer. It was immersive comprehension that allowed him to understand complex situations as if he had personally visited every location mentioned in the reports. The former Dominion colonies were thriving. Worlds that had spent centuries providing resources for the military machine were now developing their own unique contributions to galactic civilization. The Kethron system had become a center for artistic expression, their natural crystalline physiology allowing them to create sculptures that existed across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The Zortok homeworld was pioneering new forms of mathematics that treated numbers as living entities with their own personalities and preferences. "Most remarkable," Vexmore mused, "is how quickly our former subjects embraced these changes. I expected resistance, rebellion, chaos. Fear creates resistance," Krillna observed. "When people discover they can contribute meaningfully to something greater than themselves, resistance transforms into enthusiasm. The humans understood something we never did, that beings perform best when they're creating rather than simply obeying." Through the enhanced perception networks, Vexmore could sense the emotional resonance of billions of beings across the galaxy. Where once there had been the dull ache of suppressed potential and barely contained resentment, now there was a harmony of purpose that grew stronger with each passing day. Species that had been natural enemies for millennia were discovering shared interests and collaborative possibilities. Administrator Chen materialized beside them with the casual disregard for physical laws that humans seemed to treat as routine. His form solidified from probability clouds as if he had simply chosen to be there, rather than traveling from somewhere else. "Admiral, Sub-Commander," he greeted them with the warm familiarity that had replaced formal military protocols. "I thought you might want to observe the testing of our new joint project." Through the living walls of their transformed command center, they could see the fruits of 6 months of unprecedented cooperation. The vessel taking shape in Earth's orbital construction facilities was unlike anything that had ever existed. Dominion bioengineering provided its living hull, which could adapt and evolve to meet changing conditions. Terran's spatial manipulation technology allowed it to exist in 11 dimensions simultaneously while remaining coherent in normal space. Contributions from dozens of other species added capabilities that transcended traditional concepts of what a starship could do. "The Harmony," Vexmore said, watching the magnificent vessel prepare for its maiden voyage. "A fitting name for our first truly collaborative creation." The ship was more than a vehicle. It was a statement of possibility. Its bioorganic hull pulsed with patterns that spoke of living thought, while crystalline matrices throughout its structure processed information in ways that bordered on precognitive. Weapon systems had been replaced with what the humans called transformation arrays, devices that could alter hostile matter into beneficial configurations without destroying the underlying patterns that gave it meaning. "The test will involve contact with the Drakmor Imperium," Chen explained. "They've been observing our transformation from their fortress worlds in the galactic rim. Intelligence suggests they're planning a preemptive strike before we can infect them with our collaborative philosophy." Vexmore's scales shifted through colors that indicated complex emotional processing. The Drakmor were everything the Dominion had once been, magnified to extremes. They viewed the universe as a resource to be consumed and all other life forms as obstacles to be eliminated. Their technology was devoted entirely to destruction, and their society was built around the worship of entropy itself. "They represent everything we once were," Vexmore observed. "Absolute commitment to domination, complete certainty in their own superiority, and the belief that cooperation is weakness." "Exactly," Chen agreed, "which makes them perfect for demonstrating how far we've come. The Harmony's mission is to offer them the same choice we offered you: evolution or isolation." The magnificent vessel undocked from the construction platform with movements that resembled a dancer more than a machine. Its departure created ripples in local space-time that spoke of technologies that treated physics as a collaborative partner rather than an obstacle to overcome. Within moments, it had vanished into hyperspace using propulsion methods that made traditional faster-than-light travel look like crawling. "Will they accept our offer?" Krillna wondered. Chen's expression grew thoughtful. "The Drakmor have spent 10 million years perfecting their destructive capabilities. They've never encountered anything they couldn't eventually destroy through superior firepower. The concept that something might be immune to destruction while remaining benevolent is completely outside their experience." Hours passed as they monitored the Harmony's progress toward Drakmor space. The ship moved through hyperspace corridors that it carved through reality's substrate, leaving behind pathways that other vessels could use to travel more efficiently. Even in transit, it was improving the galaxy's infrastructure. When contact occurred, it was unlike anything in recorded military history. The Drakmor defense fleet that met the Harmony consisted of over 10,000 warships, each one capable of sterilizing entire solar systems. Their vessels were dark manifestations of pure aggression, bristling with weapons that could unmake matter at the quantum level. The fleet formation spoke of millions of years of tactical evolution devoted entirely to maximum destructive efficiency. They opened fire immediately. The energy released in the first salvo would have been sufficient to crack a moon in half. Antimatter torpedoes, reality-shearing beam weapons, and gravity bombs that could create temporary black holes all converged on the Harmony's position with mathematical precision. The attacks passed through the ship without effect. "Impossible," Admiral Vexmore whispered, though by now he should have expected such impossibility from human engineering. "The Harmony exists in a probability state where it cannot be destroyed by hostile intent," Chen explained calmly. "The Drakmor weapons are calibrated for destruction, so they literally cannot perceive the ship as a valid target. It's like trying to shoot at the concept of friendship with bullets made of hatred." The Drakmor fleet's response was predictable. When their primary weapons failed, they deployed secondary systems. When those proved ineffective, they began ramming attempts. Massive battleships threw themselves at the Harmony with suicidal determination, only to pass through its hull like ghosts. Then the Harmony began to respond. Rather than returning fire, it began to sing. The transmission that emanated from the ship carried information encoded in harmonics that touched the deepest levels of consciousness. It wasn't a communication in any traditional sense. It was an invitation to experience the universe from a completely different perspective. The song told the story of cooperation replacing conquest, of creation superseding destruction, of joy discovered in building rather than breaking. It showed the Drakmor fleet visions of what they could become if they chose evolution over entropy. One by one, Drakmor warships stopped firing. Their crews, beings who had never known any emotion except rage and hunger for destruction, suddenly experienced something unprecedented. They felt what it was like to create beauty instead of ugliness, to nurture growth instead of spreading decay, to be part of something larger than their individual desires for dominance. "By all the void spirits," Admiral Vexmore breathed, watching the tactical displays show an entire fleet laying down arms. "They're surrendering without a fight." "They're not surrendering," Chen corrected. "They're choosing. For the first time in their civilization's history, the Drakmor are being offered alternatives to destruction. Most of them find the alternatives surprisingly attractive." The transformation of the Drakmor fleet was visible even at their distance. Dark hulls began to sprout crystalline growths that caught and reflected starlight in patterns of impossible beauty. Weapon systems reconfigured themselves into artistic expressions that celebrated the joy of existence rather than its termination. Ships that had been built to spread death across the galaxy became instruments of creation and wonder. Not all the Drakmor chose transformation. Perhaps 1/10 of their fleet broke away from the group, their crews choosing to remain committed to their destructive philosophy. But even those ships found their weapons mysteriously ineffective against vessels that had chosen cooperation over conflict. "What happens to those who refuse the offer?" Krilna asked. "They get exactly what they choose," Chen replied. "Isolation. They can continue their destructive existence, but only in areas of space where they cannot harm others. We've prepared pocket dimensions where they can fight and destroy to their heart's content without affecting the larger galaxy." The concept was elegant and compassionate. Those who truly could not evolve beyond their destructive nature weren't eliminated. They were simply provided with environments where their choices couldn't cause suffering to others. It was rehabilitation through natural consequences rather than punishment. Days passed as reports flowed in from across Drakmor space. Planet after planet was choosing to join the galactic collective, their populations discovering capabilities they had never been allowed to develop under their empire's destructive ideology. Worlds that had been barren wastelands began to bloom as terraforming technologies that emphasized harmony with natural systems replaced the resource extraction methods that had stripped them bare. "The rate of voluntary transformation is exceeding all projections," Krilna reported. "It seems that once beings are offered genuine alternatives to domination and submission, they embrace those alternatives with enthusiasm." Admiral Vexmore studied the transformation spreading across the galaxy like ripples in a pond. Species that had been bitter enemies for millennia were discovering shared interests and collaborative possibilities. Technologies that had been developed for warfare were being converted to peaceful purposes that enhanced life throughout the galaxy. "In all my years of military service," he mused, "I never imagined that the greatest victory would involve no fighting at all." Chen smiled. "That's because you were thinking in terms of victory and defeat. We prefer to think in terms of growth and stagnation. Everyone who chooses growth wins, even if they were previously enemies." The view screen showed the galaxy as it existed now, a network of interconnected civilizations sharing knowledge, resources, and dreams. Trade routes had become information highways, where ideas traveled faster than goods. Conflicts that had seemed irreconcilable were being resolved through creative problem-solving that found solutions beneficial to all parties. "What's next?" Admiral Vexmore asked. "Exploration," Chen replied. "Not conquest, not expansion for its own sake, but genuine exploration. We've barely scratched the surface of what's possible when hundreds of species work together toward common goals. The universe is far stranger and more wonderful than any of us suspected." Through the bio-neural networks, Admiral Vexmore could sense the collective excitement of trillions of beings working together to unlock the mysteries of existence itself. Mathematics that treated numbers as living entities. Physics that negotiated with reality rather than simply describing it. Art forms that existed across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Music that could heal trauma by reharmonizing the quantum foundations of memory. And beyond this galaxy, he wondered. Chen's expression grew thoughtful as he gazed out at the stars. There are indications of other galactic communities, some of which have achieved levels of integration that make our recent accomplishments look primitive. We've received what might be greeting signals from civilizations that learn to transcend individual existence entirely while maintaining the diversity that makes consciousness interesting. The implications were staggering. If their galaxy's transformation was just the beginning, if there were levels of existence and cooperation that they hadn't even begun to imagine, then the future held possibilities that couldn't be contained in any single mind. "Will we be ready for such contact?" Admiral Vexmore asked. "We'll evolve until we are," Chen replied confidently. "That's the beauty of exponential growth. Each step forward makes the next step possible. We've learned to think beyond individual limitations, beyond species barriers, beyond the assumption that conflict is inevitable. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Admiral Vexmore looked out at the galaxy that had once been his to conquer and felt something he had never experienced during his military career. Not pride in domination, not satisfaction in victory, but joy in participation. He was part of something larger than himself, something that grew stronger and more beautiful with each being that chose to join it. The Dominion was gone, transformed into something unrecognizable. The Drakmor Imperium was dissolving into willing cooperation. Across the galaxy, civilizations that had spent eons in conflict were discovering the exponential power of working together. And in a small blue world at the center of it all, the descendants of creatures who had once huddled around fires were quietly preparing for whatever wonders awaited among the stars, processing the implications. Around the galaxy, Dominion worlds were discovering that cooperation yielded better results than domination. Fleets were finding that creativity served them better than destruction. The entire foundation of their civilization was being peacefully but irresistibly transformed. "If we accept their offer," Admiral Vexmore said slowly, "what becomes of our military structure, our chain of command, our entire way of life?" Chen's expression grew compassionate. "Your organizational abilities become tools for coordination rather than control. Your strategic minds become architects of cooperation rather than conquest. Your way of life evolves into something that honors your strengths while eliminating the limitations that have held you back." The communication link showed dozens of other Dominion commanders joining the conference. Reports flowed in from across the galaxy as officer after officer described the impossible things they had witnessed. The humans weren't destroying their civilization. They were offering to help it become something better than it had ever been. "We need time to consider this," Admiral Vexmore said finally. "Of course," Chen agreed. "Time is one thing we have in abundance. When you're ready to move forward, we'll be here to help with the transition." As the communication ended, Zexathai found himself looking at the galaxy with new understanding. The Dominion hadn't been conquered, it had been invited to evolve. And across hundreds of worlds, his people were discovering that evolution was far more exciting than they had ever imagined, and cling to obsolete paradigms until they crumble around you. The choice is yours. The Dominion fleet found itself in orbit around Earth, their weapons useless, their defenses irrelevant, their entire understanding of power dynamics suddenly meaningless. Below them, a world that should have been a primitive backwater pulsed with energies that could reshape reality itself. For the first time in his long military career, Commander HFY faced an enemy he could neither fight nor understand. An enemy that offered friendship instead of conquest, evolution instead of destruction. An enemy that might just save them from themselves.